I called Candace.
Yeah, and with that?
She didn't answer.
Okay.
She called us back. No shed of tears, no nothing. I said, what's wrong? She goes, Summer's missing. I go, what do you mean?
Summer's gone.
Summer's gone. I said, what do you mean Summer's gone? Like, I started interrogating her. I said, what do you mean? I just seen you guys at 2:30 when you dropped Hunter off. She goes, she's gone. What do you mean she's gone?
On June 15, 2021, a 5-year-old girl vanished from her home on a quiet hill in rural Tennessee. Within hours, helicopters circled the dark woods, search dogs traced the creek beds, and hundreds of volunteers called her name Summer. Days turned into months, then years. Investigators followed thousands of leads. They searched forests, wells, and rivers. They questioned neighbors, tracked vehicles, chased rumors, and still nothing. No trail, no witness, no closure. 4 years later, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation still calls it a case outside the norm. From the desperate night she disappeared to the quiet press updates of 2025, this is the timeline of a mystery that refuses to die. A case built on silence, doubt, and one haunting question: how can a child simply vanish and never be found? Was this the act of an outsider? Or did the truth begin and end inside her own home? The morning began like any other in the hills of Beech Creek, quiet, green, and slow. By evening, that stillness would turn into chaos. At 110 Ben Hill Road, a small home perched on a rugged Tennessee hillside, 5-year-old Summer Moon, Utah Wells spent her last known day surrounded by family. The sound of birds, a summer breeze through the trees, her laughter echoing down the slope, everything that seemed ordinary would, by nightfall, become part of one of America's most confounding disappearances. It was June 15, 2021. Her mother, Candace Bly, said the day had been simple: errands, chores, and a visit with Summer's grandmother, often called Grandis. According to Candace, they had been outside together, planting flowers by Grandma's trailer. It was around 5:30 p.m. when she said Summer went inside to play with her brothers. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe less. When Candace walked into the house, Summer was gone. That instant, between the hum of the summer air and the sharp realization that her child was missing, would fracture time for the entire Wells family. Candace searched the house, then the basement, calling her daughter's name. She looked around the yard, then down toward the tree line where the path disappeared into the woods. Nothing. She was just here, she said later, her voice trembling through the 911 call. My daughter's gone. She was just here a minute ago. At 6:30 p.m., Candace dialed 911. Within minutes, the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office dispatched units to the isolated property. The area was rural and hard to navigate, narrow gravel roads winding through forest, steep slopes, and uneven ground. The first deputies on scene searched the yard, the outbuildings, and the dense brush behind the house. They found no footprints, no signs of a struggle, no trail leading away. By 7 p.m., the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had been alerted. By 7:30 p.m., the FBI joined the coordination efforts. Within 2 hours, Ben Hill Road, a quiet country lane that rarely saw outsiders, was flooded with emergency vehicles, flashing lights, and the echo of voices calling Summer's name into the dusk. Neighbors stepped outside, stunned. Helicopters began circling overhead, sweeping beams of light across the dark woods. Volunteers from across the county arrived with flashlights, ATVs, and bloodhounds. The search command post was set up near the Beech Creek Volunteer Fire Department. From that moment, the disappearance of one child became a race against time. Deputies and rescue workers fanned out through fields, ravines, and streams. The first K-9 teams arrived that night, dogs trained to detect scent even in difficult terrain. They picked up a trail briefly around the property, but lost it at the edge of the woods. It was as if Summer had evaporated. Her father, Don Wells, returned home from work in shock. That night, he gave his first interview to local reporters, his voice raw and disbelieving. Someone took her. She wouldn't just walk off. She's too young, too afraid of the dark. As darkness fell, the mountain air grew cold and heavy. Search teams used thermal imaging, drones, and floodlights to calm every inch of the nearby hollows. The woods echoed with her name, Summer, Summer. The calls grew softer through the night, swallowed by the wind and the rustling leaves. By midnight, more than 100 people were actively searching. The terrain was brutal steep slopes, thick undergrowth, and snakes hidden in the brush. Volunteers stumbled, scratched, but refused to stop. A storm threatened in the distance. The sheriff's office advised everyone to check their properties, sheds, crawl spaces, and vehicles. Still, no sign. At dawn, the next day, TBI spokeswoman Leslie Earhart stood before cameras and said the words that would define the case. This case is outside the norm. Every scenario is on the table. In that single sentence, the world shifted from tragedy to mystery. If Summer hadn't wandered off, and no stranger had been seen, then what had happened in that narrow window between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m.? Investigators retraced every minute. They questioned the timeline, when Candace called 911, when Dawn arrived, when neighbors joined the search. They looked for tire marks, shoe prints, broken branches, any disturbance in the soft soil. There were none. The dogs circled the home again and again, alerting briefly near the basement door but not beyond it. Forensic teams scoured the house, took items for scent samples, photographs, DNA. The result was the same: no clear sign of abduction, no evidence of foul play, and yet no child. In the following 24 hours, over 100 agencies became involved. 1,500 volunteers joined the search over the next 2 weeks. Helicopters, divers, and drones covered more than 5,000 acres of rugged land. Nothing was found, not a piece of clothing, not a footprint, not even a toy. Candace, overwhelmed, gave few statements. Don became the family's voice to the media. He told reporters, "We just want our daughter home. We're broken." But the more he spoke, the more the public began to question. How could a child vanish in daylight, surrounded by family, and leave no trace? That question would haunt every investigator, every neighbor, every person who saw Summer's photo, a smiling blonde girl with bright eyes, barefoot in the grass. As the first week ended, the search turned from rescue to recovery, then from recovery to suspicion. The property was searched multiple times, ponds drained, wells examined. Yet the more the police looked, the less sense it made. She hadn't wandered off far enough to vanish completely. No vehicle had been seen. No scream had been heard. It was an impossible disappearance. In the following days, the TBI tip line flooded with calls, more than 200 in the first 72 hours. Everyone was logged, cross-checked, and exhausted. The investigation expanded to surrounding counties. Agents visited homes, interviewed anyone who had been on Ben Hill Road that day. Still, the timeline never changed. Summer was alive at 5:30 p.m. By 6:30 p.m. she was gone. The family home, once filled with children's laughter, became a crime scene wrapped in silence. Television crews parked along the gravel road. Reporters whispered through fences. Posters with her face began to appear on store windows across Tennessee. Missing, Summer Moon, Utah Wells, age 5. Inside the small Beach Creek community, fear spread faster than the news itself. Parents watched their children closer. People locked their doors for the first time in years. And in the house on the hill, the Wells family waited for an answer that never came. By the end of June, the official search had already become one of the largest in Tennessee's history. Still, nothing. No body, no clue, no goodbye. The TBI continued to process tips, field interviews, and release small updates to the media, each one shorter than the last. Search efforts continue. No significant developments. Still an active investigation. Somewhere between those lines, hope began to fade. For those who were there that first night, the memories remain vivid. The flashing red lights through the trees, the smell of rain and pine, the sound of boots in mud and radio chatter. They remember calling her name again and again until their voices broke. She was 5. She was barefoot. And in the space between 2 heartbeats, she was gone. In the first 48 hours after Summer Wells vanished, Tennessee became the heart of a search unlike anything the quiet hills of Hawkins County had ever seen. Every dirt road, every hollow, every stream within miles of Ben Hill Road was suddenly alive with the hum of engines, the thud of boots, and the desperate voices of strangers calling the same name. The mission began with urgency and hope, but as days passed, it evolved into something darker: fight against nature itself, and against the unthinkable truth that sometimes, even an army cannot find a single missing child. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined forces, coordinating from a mobile command center near the Beach Creek Fire Department. Every agency brought its own equipment, its own maps, its own sense of purpose. For the first week, it felt like no one would rest until Summer was found. Helicopters roared over the hills, sweeping with infrared cameras that could detect the faintest heat signatures under the forest canopy. Drone teams scanned ridges, ravines, and clearings. Divers combed the muddy ponds and creeks. Search dogs followed trails into the thick woods that seemed to close in tighter with every step. The terrain was relentless: steep slopes, tangled vines, rattlesnakes hidden beneath the leaves. The heat climbed to nearly 100 degrees by afternoon, and the humidity turned the air into steam. Volunteers waded through knee-deep water, scratched and bruised, refusing to stop even when night fell. The search grid extended outward, covering more than 5,000 acres. Crews marked every sector with bright orange tape, each line representing another small victory against chaos. Commanders worked in shifts, tracking progress on whiteboards streaked with dirt and sweat. The sheriff described it as organized desperation. Helicopter pilots said the area was one of the most unforgiving landscapes they'd ever flown over. Every direction looked the same: endless green, unbroken forest. From the start, investigators worked under three main theories. The first, and the one they hoped for, was that Summer had simply wandered off, maybe chasing an animal, maybe exploring the woods she had known since birth. The second, more terrifying, was that she had been abducted, taken quickly by someone who knew the area. The third, whispered quietly but never dismissed, was that she might have been hidden, concealed somewhere nearby, within the dense wilderness that surrounded her home like a wall. By the second week, all three theories were collapsing under the same weight: no evidence. There were no footprints leading away from the house, no items of clothing found, no broken branches, no sign of struggle, and most unsettling of all, no scent trail. The K9 units, dogs trained to detect even the faintest trace of human presence, lost her scent within yards of the home. Handlers were baffled. In dozens of searches, they had never seen a trail vanish so abruptly. It was as though the child had stepped off the earth itself. The phrase, "no scent, no trail," became a grim refrain repeated on news broadcasts and across social media. Each update from the TBI felt smaller than the last. We continue to follow leads. No significant developments. Still searching. And with every passing day, the tone of the mission shifted. What began as a rescue became a recovery, and then, quietly, a mystery. The volunteers, exhausted but determined, refused to stop. Some returned daily after work, their flashlights cutting through the dark woods. They brought food and water, built makeshift rest stations, and combed through miles of thickets. Farmers opened their land. Neighbors searched their barns and wells. A local pilot offered his private plane to help with aerial surveys. At night, when the helicopters returned to base, the hills fell silent again, and the only sound was the whisper of wind through trees that seemed to hold their secrets too tightly. By the end of June, the search had consumed the county. The FBI deployed mobile analysis teams to check tips and phone data. Drones from the Department of Homeland Security scanned from above. Specialized crews examined wells, septic tanks, culverts, and abandoned properties. But despite the sheer scale of the operation, hundreds of professionals, thousands of volunteer hours, not a single piece of verifiable evidence emerged. Reporters gathered at daily briefings outside the command center. They waited for any sign of progress. Each morning, Leslie Earhart stepped to the microphone and repeated what had become a ritual of reassurance and restraint. "We're using every available resource. We're pursuing every credible lead." Her voice was steady, but behind her eyes was the exhaustion of someone who knew the odds were shrinking with each sunrise. On July 2nd, Don Wells appeared on local television, interviewed by WJHL News Channel 11. He looked hollow, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "It's like she just evaporated," he said softly. "We can't even find a footprint." His words resonated across the state, echoing the disbelief that had begun to set in even among searchers. The idea of a child simply disappearing without a trace seemed impossible, yet that was exactly what had happened. By mid-July, the once bustling search zones began to thin out. Volunteers returned to their jobs and families, leaving behind muddy tracks and unanswered prayers. The command center scaled down its operations, though TBI agents continued to chase tips in the background. Each new lead was checked and discarded. Some came from psychics, others from strangers claiming visions, still others from people who swore they saw a small blonde girl at gas stations hundreds of miles away. None proved real. The physical search officially paused in early August. The sheriff's office and TBI confirmed that more than 11 agencies had participated and more than 1,500 people had walked the hills, rivers, and roads. They had used infrared imaging, dive teams, horses, and cadaver dogs. They had searched the same ground multiple times, turning over every stone. And still, no physical evidence, nothing to explain where Summer went or what happened in that crucial hour between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m. In their final summer briefing, the TBI announced that they had exhausted the area. A news helicopter captured a drone rising over the Beech Creek Valley, pulling away from the trees as the sun dipped below the horizon. From above, the entire landscape looked peaceful again, green, endless, and indifferent. The scene that had once been alive with search teams and flashing lights was now quiet, returned to the stillness of nature. For many, that image marked the end of hope. The search for Summer Wells had gone from a massive public operation to a quiet, methodical investigation behind closed doors. People in the community still hung posters, still prayed at vigils, but they no longer believed she was hiding somewhere in the woods. Whatever happened had happened quickly, silently, and close to home. As the summer of 2021 faded into autumn, the unanswered question grew heavier. If more than 1,500 people could not find a single trace, then what exactly were they looking for? As the summer heat faded into the cool air of Tennessee's autumn, the search for Summer Wells began to change shape. What had started as a desperate rescue effort was slowly becoming something else, a painstaking criminal investigation built on fragments of time, missing minutes, and too many unanswered questions. The helicopters were gone now. The drones were silent. The volunteers had returned home. In their place came the investigators, armed with not shovels and flashlights, but with timelines, reports, and suspicions. By September 2021, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation was working around the clock to reconstruct the final known moments of June 15th, the day Summer vanished. Agents mapped out the family's movements down to the minute, questioning every statement that didn't align perfectly. When had Candace last seen her daughter? What exactly had Candace, the grandmother, been doing near the trailer that afternoon? How long did it take Candace to notice Summer was gone? The details, once small, were now enormous. Each second mattered. Each word could shift the direction of the case. Investigators revisited the home at 110 Ben Hill Road, this time with forensic specialists and behavioral experts from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. The property was sealed again, photographed, measured, and examined under ultraviolet light. Search warrants were executed quietly, away from the cameras that still camped along the narrow gravel road. Officers carried out computers, cell phones, and pieces of evidence sealed in brown paper bags. They returned multiple times over the next few months, digging deeper into the digital and emotional landscape of the Wells family. It was during this period that the public first heard the recorded 911 call placed by Candace on June 15th. The voice on the recording was trembling, panicked, and full of disbelief. "My daughter's gone. She was just here." The call lasted less than 2 minutes, but investigators dissected every second of it. They compared tone, timing, and responses to standard behavioral patterns in missing child cases. Nothing in the call could be used as proof of guilt, but it didn't erase doubt either. The Wells home, once the heart of the search effort, now stood as the focal point of suspicion. Detectives conducted multiple interviews with Dawn and Candace Wells, noting that while both continued to cooperate, inconsistencies were beginning to surface. Candace's timeline didn't always match her mother's. The sequence of errands, the moment they returned home, the description of Summer's last movements, all seemed to shift slightly between tellings. Neighbors were interviewed again. Surveillance footage from nearby roads and businesses was reviewed for the 100th time. Cell tower pings were analyzed, showing who was where during those crucial hours. FBI analysts traced phone records, searching for unusual calls or messages. Nothing concrete surfaced, but the effort revealed something more subtle, a pattern of chaos and inconsistency within the family itself. By the end of 2021, the tone of law enforcement had shifted. The TBI released a short but telling statement. While the family remains cooperative, no one has been ruled out. It was a phrase chosen carefully, but its implications were explosive. The once sympathetic public began to fracture. Online forums turned from empathy to accusation. Comment sections filled with speculation. Talk shows debated whether the parents' behavior was grief or guilt. Through it all, the Wells family stayed under the microscope. Don appeared on national broadcasts and podcasts, sometimes tearful, sometimes defensive. In one interview, he admitted that our lives are a nightmare, but his candidness often fueled more questions than answers. Candace, on the other hand, retreated from the spotlight, rarely speaking publicly after early 2022. Each silence was interpreted differently, by investigators, by journalists, by the watching world. Meanwhile, the Department of Children's Services launched a parallel investigation into the family's living conditions. Reports suggested that the home was cluttered, the environment unstable. DCS involvement wasn't about criminal charges, it was about child welfare. But their findings only deepened the perception that something inside the Wells household had been wrong long before Summer vanished. In late 2021, the couple's other children were temporarily removed from the home, adding another layer of heartbreak and public scrutiny. Inside the TBI command center, investigators built timelines like architects, each chart stretching from June 15th at 8 a.m. to midnight that same night. They plotted phone data, interviews, witness sightings, and environmental conditions. They recreated the family's day minute by minute, down to the drive to town, the stop at the swimming hole, and the return home. Some details fit, others refused to. There were missing blocks of time, gaps that no one could explain. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit studied every interview and video of the family, watching body language, tone, and emotional consistency. It wasn't about proving guilt, it was about understanding patterns. Certain topics made family members uneasy, certain questions were avoided. The more agents pressed, the more contradictions appeared. Through the winter of 2021 and into 2022, hundreds of new tips continued to flow in. Some came from psychics, others from self-proclaimed investigators, and a few from well-meaning citizens who believed they had spotted Summer in distant towns. Each lead was investigated. Each one faded into nothing. By February, the TBI publicly confirmed that none of the hundreds of tips since the summer had led to a single credible discovery. Still, the investigation pushed forward. Agents executed new search warrants, expanded the radius, and revisited the digital data collected from phones and social media accounts. They compared statements made in June with interviews recorded months later, looking for shifts in narrative. Candace said she went inside for a few minutes. Grandis said it was longer. The boys' recollections varied slightly. Individually, the inconsistencies could be written off as trauma or confusion. Together, they created a puzzle that refused to form a clear picture. In early 2022, local journalists began to sense a change in tone from the TBI. There were fewer updates, fewer press conferences. The silence from investigators felt intentional. Behind the scenes, they were working methodically, treating the Wells case as both a missing person investigation and a potential criminal case. The public, however, saw only the vacuum and filled it with theories. Through it all, the TBI maintained its position. "We continue to investigate all possibilities," one spokesperson said. "We have not ruled anyone out." By the end of 2022, the Wells case had become both an investigation and a mirror reflecting the darker side of public fascination. It was no longer just about a missing child. It was about truth, perception, and the thin line between empathy and doubt. The image of Summer's bright smile still hung in shop windows, but behind it lay a growing question that no one dared to voice too loudly. What if the answers weren't out in the woods at all? But inside that house on Ben Hill Road, the TBI's timeline reconstruction ended where it began, between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m., in the narrow space between two stories that didn't quite match. Investigators could measure distance, trace phone data, and analyze behavior, but they could not bridge the silence of that lost hour. And so, as 2022 drew to a close, the official statement remained unchanged. The investigation is active and ongoing. We have not ruled anyone out. By the start of 2022, the case of Summer Wells had shifted from rescue to reckoning. The once frenzied search through the hills of Beach Creek was over, but the scrutiny surrounding her family had only intensified. The world no longer asked, "Where is Summer?" It began to ask, "Who is responsible?" In February 2022, the focus turned sharply towards Summer's father. Don Wells was arrested and later pleaded guilty to driving under the influence, a violation of his probation on earlier charges. Local court filings and coverage from Fox Chattanooga confirmed he was sentenced to 180 days in jail. The image of him in handcuffs, tired and gaunt, flashed across Tennessee newsrooms. The public that once sympathized with his desperation now saw something different: instability, perhaps guilt, perhaps grief turned destructive. While Don served his sentence, Candace Bly, Summer's mother, disappeared from public view. She deactivated her social media accounts, stopped giving interviews, and retreated to the quiet isolation of Ben Hill Road. Those who had followed the story closely noticed the silence immediately. Online forums filled the void with speculation. Some claimed she had broken down emotionally. Others insisted she was hiding something. Whatever the truth, her absence became fuel for the internet's ever-turning rumor mill. At the same time, the Department of Children's Services confirmed that the Wells' remaining children had been removed from the home. Court documents cited safety concerns and unfit living conditions. Local reporters at WJHL and Kingsport Times News described the property as cluttered and in poor condition, a far cry from the idyllic rural image first painted during the search. What began as a missing child investigation was now unraveling into a broader look at a family in crisis. Inside the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, agents continued their methodical work. Thousands of leads had been processed since June 2021, but nearly all had led to dead ends. In a series of public statements through 2022, spokesperson Leslie Earhart maintained a careful tone. This remains an active investigation. No one has been ruled out. Behind those words, investigators were still comparing digital data, re-interviewing witnesses, and analyzing inconsistencies in the family's timeline. But publicly, the silence was deafening. By mid-2022, the Federal Bureau of Investigation began scaling back its role. The agency's specialized child abduction rapid deployment team, which had assisted since the first days of the Amber Alert, gradually withdrew, leaving the TBI and Hawkins County Sheriff's Office as the primary agencies. By June 15, 2023, the second anniversary of Summer's disappearance, the TBI told WCYB News there was no new information to publicly provide, though agents continued to work alongside local law enforcement and the FBI in a limited capacity. It was a rare admission that the trail had gone cold. As the official investigation slowed, the case found new life online. True, crime creators began reconstructing the story for millions of viewers. Channels such as Chronicles of Olivia, Plunder, and Duty Ron turned the Wells case into serialized investigations, part empathy, part entertainment, part obsession. Each video promised new insight or exclusive analysis, yet all circled the same unanswered questions. The internet split in two, one side convinced the parents were involved, the other defending them as victims of a relentless witch hunt. This digital storm had consequences. Every old interview was dissected frame by frame. Don's shaky voice, Candace's silences, even the background of family photos became points of contention. On YouTube and Reddit, users debated whether tears were genuine or staged, whether a pause meant guilt or exhaustion. The tragedy had become theater, a global conversation built on fragments of grief. Meanwhile, back in Hawkins County, the Wells property remained sealed, its gate chained, its yard overgrown. Reporters who once crowded the gravel road now stood at a distance. The family rarely appeared in public. Don, upon his release from jail in late 2022, gave a few interviews to local stations, expressing renewed faith that his daughter was alive. "We just want her home," he said. But the tone was weary, the conviction strained. The TBI continued to receive tips, more than 6,500 by late 2023, but none that shifted the trajectory of the case. Each anniversary came with the same statement: "We will not stop pursuing any and all leads." Yet behind those words lay the bitter truth that there were no new leads left to chase. What had begun as a case of hope and unity had turned into a lesson in exhaustion. The public's compassion, once overflowing, had hardened into frustration. The Wells family, trapped between suspicion and sorrow, had become a symbol of unanswered justice. The FBI was mostly gone. The volunteers had returned to their lives. The posters of Summer, the smiling blonde girl in a pink t-shirt, still clung to telephone poles, faded and sun-bleached, whispering the same plea that began it all: missing. By the end of 2023, even seasoned reporters called the Wells investigation stuck in the same place it was the first week. And perhaps they were right. The case had stopped moving, but the noise never did. Every rumor, every theory, every whisper ensured that Summer's name would never truly disappear, even if the truth about what happened to her remained buried somewhere in those quiet Tennessee hills. By the start of 2023, the search for Summer Wells no longer looked like an investigation. It looked like a memory. The command posts were gone, the maps were rolled up, and the bright orange ribbons that once marked search zones had faded to pale yellow, flapping quietly in the wind. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation still listed her case as open and active, but those words had become more ceremonial than hopeful, an official phrase repeated every few months, like a candle relit out of duty rather than belief. There were no more helicopters in the sky above Beach Creek, no more lines of volunteers sweeping through the fields. The TBI newsroom occasionally posted a short update: the investigation remains active. Agents continue to follow all credible leads. Each message was nearly identical to the one before it, sterile and careful, almost robotic in tone. For the families and followers who still watched, those words were a reminder not of progress, but of time passing, month after month, with nothing new to say. The FBI by now was no longer directly involved. Their field agents had withdrawn the previous year, leaving the TBI and the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office to manage what had effectively become a cold case without the label. The sheriff gave a rare interview in late 2023, his voice tired, his phrasing deliberate. "We're still working it, but there's no timetable. We haven't given up." Behind him, the hills of Ben Hill Road looked the same as they always had: green, quiet, indifferent. The Wells family, broken and weary, tried to reclaim a kind of normal. Dawn and Candace began appearing on small podcasts and local live streams, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Their tone was different now, less defensive, more desperate. Dawn spoke about faith, forgiveness, and the hope that Summer was with God. Candace mostly listened, her voice faint when she spoke at all. In one emotional broadcast, Dawn's voice cracked as he said, "People think we stopped looking. We never did. We just have nowhere left to look." For the first time since 2021, small gatherings began to reappear in the Beach Creek community. Locals erected a small wooden cross near the entrance of Ben Hill Road, decorated with yellow ribbons and a photo of Summer in her pink t-shirt. On the anniversary of her disappearance, neighbors lit candles, sang hymns, and prayed under the dim glow of flashlights. There were no reporters this time, no press releases, only a handful of people who refused to let the silence erase her. Throughout 2023, Facebook groups and YouTube channels kept her story alive. Pages titled "Justice for Summer Wells," "Bring Summer Home," and "Voices for Summer" continued to share updates, speculation, and prayers. Some posts were analytical, revisiting timelines, phone data, and interviews, but most had shifted to something softer: remembrance. "We haven't forgotten you, baby girl." One comment read beneath a photo of Summer smiling beside her brothers. Another user wrote, "Every time I see a little blonde child running barefoot, I think of her." Across social media, the hashtag Justice for Summer persisted, shared mostly by the same small circle of advocates who had followed the case from the beginning. They were not journalists or investigators, just people who refused to let her name disappear into the endless churn of internet tragedies. Every few weeks, they posted reminders, prayer requests, and edited videos of her photos fading slowly in and out to the sound of piano music. Locals said that Beach Creek had changed. The hill that once buzzed with search vehicles and reporters had returned to its natural rhythm: frogs at dusk, the hum of crickets, the rustle of wind through pine trees. Yet, to those who lived nearby, the silence was no comfort. It was heavy an echo of something unfinished. "It's quieter than it used to be," one neighbor told WJHL in a short interview. "You can still feel her absence in the air. It's like the whole place just stopped breathing." The Wells home itself became a symbol of that stillness. Once surrounded by search teams and flashing lights, it now stood alone, its paint peeling and windows dim. A single porch light often burned through the night, even when no one was seen outside. To locals driving by, it was impossible not to look up the hill and remember. In early 2024, on what would have been Summer's 9th birthday, a small group of community members gathered again for a vigil. They brought balloons, flowers, and hand-painted rocks with her name written in glitter. A local pastor led a short prayer. "Lord, if she is with you, give peace to those who wait for answers. If she is still out there, guide her home." The words floated into the night, soft and uncertain. National media no longer covered the story. The country had moved on to newer cases, newer tragedies. But in Tennessee, the people of Hawkins County hadn't forgotten, not really. They just didn't talk about it anymore. The story had become part of the landscape, something too painful to keep repeating and too sacred to completely let go. The TBI, consistent as ever, issued its familiar quarterly line. The investigation into the disappearance of Summer Wells remains open and active. Agents continue to pursue any and all credible information. The statement was identical to the one before it, but it carried a strange kind of comfort. It meant that, officially at least, someone was still looking. And yet, beneath the formality, a quiet truth lingered. The world had grown tired. The spotlight that once scorched the Wells family had faded, leaving only shadows. The anger, the theories, the arguments, all of it had softened into something quieter, heavier. By early 2024, Beech Creek had returned to its natural state of stillness. But the silence that hung over those hills was not peace, it was memory. In a place once filled with sirens and shouts, only the wind remained to tell her story. Silence had become the loudest thing in Hawkins County. By the summer of 2025, 4 years had passed since the day 5-year-old Summer Wells vanished into the Tennessee hills. For many, the case had become a fading ghost of a mystery, spoken of only in whispers or online threads that repeated the same unanswered questions. But in July of that year, everything changed. For the first time in a long time, the public saw movement, not closure, not justice, but something that looked dangerously close to hope. On July 12, 2025, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation posted an unexpected update on its official YouTube channel. The video, titled "Renewed Search Efforts, Hawkins County," showed agents in the field with new equipment, high-resolution drones, ground-penetrating radar, and specially trained cadaver dogs. The clip was brief, less than 2 minutes, but it was the first visual sign of official action in nearly 2 years. In the footage, viewers could see TBI agents and local volunteers combing steep wooded slopes under a gray Tennessee sky. The narrator's voice was steady, almost cautious. Investigators continue to explore all possibilities in the disappearance of Summer Wells. Advances in technology have provided new tools to help us revisit areas that were previously inaccessible. The Beech Creek area, once the epicenter of chaos, was alive again with flashing lights, vehicles, and quiet determination. Agents marked zones with bright red flags and sent drones flying over ravines too deep for searchers to reach on foot. Local news outlets like WJHL and WSMV covered the development immediately, showing aerial shots of the renewed operation. There were no guarantees, but the atmosphere had shifted. For the first time in years, something was happening. The announcement reignited public interest. Hashtags that had gone dormant came alive again: Find Summer Wells, Justice for Summer, Never Forgotten. Within 24 hours, hundreds of posts flooded social media, some hopeful, some skeptical. One user wrote, 4 years later, and they're finally back on that hill. Maybe now we'll get answers. Another replied, they've searched there 1,000 times, but maybe technology will find what human eyes missed. Then, on August 13, 2025, came a second, even more powerful update. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, in partnership with TBI, released an age progression image of what Summer might look like at 9 years old. The image spread instantly across the internet, a lifelike portrait showing a girl with soft blonde hair, deep hazel eyes, and a gentle, half-curious smile. She looked older, stronger, but unmistakably the same child who once stared from the missing posters. The photo appeared on TBI's official Facebook page, accompanied by a single line: "She would now be 9 years old. Please take a close look. If you have any information, contact 1-800-TBI-FIND." That post was shared tens of thousands of times within the first day. News anchors across the country called it the face that could bring her home. For people who had followed the case since 2021, the image hit like a wave. It was both heartbreaking and miraculous. Summer had grown older, but only in pixels, only in imagination. Local reporter Ansley Daniel from WJHL described the reaction perfectly. "It's a haunting thing. To see how she might look today. It reminds us that time has passed, but the story hasn't ended." The TBI hotline saw a sudden surge. Within a week, officials confirmed that hundreds of new tips had been submitted. Some were vague sightings, others were claims of overheard conversations or suspicious individuals. As before, most were quickly ruled out, but investigators emphasized that each one mattered. Even one credible lead could change everything. Earhart told the press. The Wells family reappeared in public shortly after the new image was released. Don Wells, his face visibly aged and wary, gave an interview to a small local outlet near Kingsport. Standing outside the family's weathered home, he said softly, "We're closer than ever. We believe this picture, this technology, could be what brings her home." He paused, his eyes wet but steady. "When I look at that face, I see my little girl. I see hope." The interview spread across social media, clipped and reposted by creators who had covered the case since the beginning. Some accused Don of trying to reclaim sympathy, others said he finally looked like a man broken beyond recovery. Regardless of interpretation, his words resonated. The image of Summer, no longer 5, now 9, gave people something to feel again. Across Hawkins County, signs and posters were replaced with the new likeness. Churches updated bulletin boards. Gas stations reprinted flyers. One cafe in Rogersville taped the photo beside its cash register with a handwritten note: "Don't forget her. She's still out there." Even online, where the case had long been consumed by argument, the tone began to soften. TikTok creators who had once criticized the family now shared the new image with simple captions like, "She deserves to be found." For a brief moment, the noise quieted, replaced by something close to unity. In Beech Creek, the renewed search effort wrapped after several days. Officials said nothing significant had been discovered, but that didn't matter to the community. The sight of agents walking those woods again, of dogs sniffing through undergrowth, of drones tracing the ridgelines, it reignited the sense that Summer's story wasn't finished. For the Wells family, hope was dangerous but irresistible. Candace remained mostly out of sight, but neighbors reported seeing her on the porch one evening, holding a printed copy of the new image. She said nothing, just looked at it for a long time before going back inside. For those who had been following the case for years, this period, the summer of 2025, felt like something sacred. A return to the beginning, but without the chaos. Instead of helicopters and reporters, there was focus. Instead of accusations, there was quiet persistence. When asked by a reporter what made this time different, one TBI agent replied, "We'll have better tools now, and maybe, after all this time, the truth is ready to be found." The image of Summer at 9 years old became a symbol, not just of loss, but of endurance. A child frozen in time, now given the chance to grow, at least in the eyes of those who refused to forget her. People began saying she had grown up in the hearts of strangers. They weren't wrong. Through technology, memory, and unshakable hope, she had become more than a missing person. She had become a promise that the story wasn't over. And as the drone footage of the July search faded to black in TBI's official video, one line lingered on screen: "We have not given up." It was simple. It was quiet. But after 4 years of waiting, it was enough to make thousands believe again. A face reborn through technology. A case revived through hope. And somewhere in the Tennessee hills, the name Summer Wells was spoken aloud once more. In the weeks following the renewed search and the release of Summer Wells' age, progression image, the internet once again lit up with activity. For a moment, it felt as if hope had returned. People were sharing her picture, updating flyers, and reminding others that after 4 long years, the case was still alive. But by mid-summer, that same wave of hope began to twist into something darker. What had started as unity turned into chaos. Social media, the same tool that had once amplified awareness, became a breeding ground for manipulation, misinformation, and cruelty disguised as curiosity. It began in June 2025, when a viral TikTok claimed that human remains had been discovered near Beach Creek. The video, set to dramatic music, showed a blurred photo of what appeared to be a wooded area taped off with yellow crime scene tape. Within hours, it had been shared over 3,000 times. The creator never named a source, only a caption: "Authorities are staying silent, but locals know the truth." By morning, the rumor had spread to Facebook groups, Twitter threads, and YouTube commentary channels. Dozens of users began uploading their own versions of the story, layering speculation on top of speculation. Some even used AI-generated crime scene photos to make their videos appear more authentic. The effect was instant and devastating, a tidal wave of false hope and renewed trauma for those who had lived the story for years. 2 days later, the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office was forced to release an official statement. No human remains related to the disappearance of Summer Wells have been found. We urge the public not to spread unverified information. The sheriff's tone was sharp, bordering on anger. He called the spread of false information deeply harmful to the family and to the investigation. Yet even his warning couldn't stop it. The video continued to circulate, copied and reposted faster than truth could catch up. By July, the misinformation took on a new form. Another viral post claimed that an AI facial recognition tool had proven Summer was alive, supposedly matching her age. Progression photo with a child seen in a shopping mall in Kentucky. The clip, complete with computer-generated evidence, gained millions of views. But when TBI agents followed up, it turned out to be completely fabricated. The AI image had been edited by an influencer seeking views. The sheriff addressed the rumors again in an interview with WJHL News, visibly frustrated. "We spend more time correcting false information than following real leads. Every minute wasted chasing a lie takes away from what truly matters: finding Summer." His words captured the exhaustion felt by law enforcement, who were trying to fight a second investigation, not against suspects, but against the internet itself. Several well-known YouTubers who had built their followings on the Wells case came under fire. Some were accused of making money from tragedy, monetizing videos filled with speculation and emotional manipulation. Titles like "The Secret Found on Ben Hill Road" and "Summer Wells, the Truth They Don't Want You to Know" flooded the algorithm. Viewers clicked, creators earned, and the truth got lost somewhere in between. By August, the family themselves had had enough. Dawn and Candace Wells, in a rare joint statement shared through a friend, pleaded with the public, "Please stop spreading lies. We beg people to focus on truth, not drama. Every rumor hurts our daughter's memory." It was a simple message, but one that few truly heard. Within hours, their statement was re-edited, re-posted, and debated as if it were just another clue in the endless online spectacle. Advocates who had once defended the family began to speak out about what they called digital exploitation. One longtime supporter wrote, "This stopped being about finding Summer a long time ago. It's about views, followers, and outrage. People are dissecting a family's pain like it's entertainment." Her words struck a nerve, but also vanished quickly under the noise. Even the TBI issued a subtle, but firm reminder on its official social media pages: "Please share only verified information from credible sources. False reports hinder our work and cause unnecessary harm." For a few days, the flood of conspiracy videos slowed, but it never stopped completely. The internet had become addicted to the case, not out of empathy, but out of fascination. By late August, the illusion of progress had faded once again. No remains had been found. No new suspects identified. The search areas had been thoroughly rechecked, and the hundreds of new tips generated by the viral stories were all dismissed as false leads. Still, the rumors lingered, living on in thumbnails, reposts, and sensational titles that refused to die. For the Wells family, it was another kind of nightmare, a modern one. They weren't just living through the absence of their daughter, they were living through her constant reinvention by strangers. Every few weeks, someone found her again, or claimed to know the truth. Each new hoax reopened the wound, and each lie pushed the real story further from the public's heart. By the end of the summer, the sheriff spoke bluntly at a press conference. Every lie drags her name further from the truth. His voice cracked slightly as he said it. Behind him, reporters scribbled notes, and cameras clicked, but even he seemed to know the statement wouldn't change much. Because in 2025, finding the truth was no longer the challenge, holding on to it was. The case of Summer Wells had always been about disappearance, but now it wasn't just the child who had vanished. It was the meaning, the trust, and the compassion that once surrounded her name. All of it swallowed by the mirage of social media, where everyone claimed to be searching, and no one was really seeing. By the end of August 2025, the noise surrounding Summer Wells' case had once again fallen into an eerie quiet. The renewed searches of July, the age progression photo, the storm of rumors on social media, all of it had subsided, leaving behind a kind of stillness that felt heavier than ever. It was the same quiet that had blanketed Beach Creek since 2021, but this time it carried the weight of 4 birthdays, 4 Christmases, and 4 years without answers. On August 13, 2025, the same day that the new age progression image was released, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issued an updated statement. It was clear, professional, and deeply disappointing. The disappearance of Summer Wells remains an active and open investigation. No arrests have been made. We continue to pursue any and all credible leads. Spokesperson Leslie Earhart, who had become the steady voice of the case, emphasized again that agents follow every tip, no matter how small. Her words were calm, deliberate, but they could not disguise the emptiness behind them. Reporters pressed the TBI for updates, for new theories, for anything that might reignite public faith. But there was nothing new to give. "We continue to work this case every day," Earhart said in an interview with WJHL. "But we can't speculate. We can't guess. We need facts, and facts are what we don't have." That simple sentence captured the heart of the tragedy, a vast investigation with nothing to hold on to. Behind the official silence, the reason was painfully clear to investigators. The terrain around Ben Hill Road had always been the enemy. Steep ridges, underground caves, sinkholes, dense thickets, and endless acres of private property made it nearly impossible to cover every inch. Even with drones and dogs, parts of those hills could swallow anything without a trace. Add to that the time, over 4 years of rain, erosion, and wildlife, and any physical clue that might once have existed was long gone. The second problem was the timeline. The first critical hours after Summer vanished had been chaotic. Conflicting accounts, delayed calls, and overlapping search efforts blurred the early evidence. No one could say for certain how long she had been missing before the first 911 call, or whether her disappearance had been a matter of minutes or something longer. That uncertainty, baked into the case from the very beginning, had poisoned every lead that followed. By 2025, investigators privately admitted what the public already suspected. The odds of finding new physical evidence were almost non-existent. But no one was willing to close the case, not officially, not emotionally. To close it would mean accepting that a 5-year-old girl had simply vanished, leaving no trace of her existence. And that was something no one could bear to write on paper. When the TBI was asked if there were any persons of interest, Earhart replied with the same phrase she had repeated since 2021, "No one has been ruled out." The words, meant to sound neutral, now carried the faint chill of finality. After 4 years, "no one ruled out" no longer meant, "we're still investigating." It meant, "we still don't know." The reality was cruel in its simplicity: no suspects, no witnesses, no evidence, no closure. And yet, despite the exhaustion of officials and the collapse of national media interest, a small current of humanity refused to fade. In early October 2025, the internet once again flickered with light, not from sensational rumors or conspiracies this time, but from quiet acts of remembrance. On the social media platform X, users began posting tributes under the hashtag #FindSummerWells. Some were familiar names, longtime advocates who had kept the case alive since 2021. One user, Breen Nabana 80, posted on October 8, 2025, "She would be 9 now. I still have her photo on my fridge. She's everyone's daughter, the one we couldn't save." Another, Letters to Esme, wrote a simple, heartbreaking line, "Every night, I still check the news, hoping. Just in case." These weren't influencers or journalists, just ordinary people who couldn't let go. Across Hawkins County, there were still physical reminders too. Outside a small Baptist church near Rogersville, a wooden cross still stood by the roadside, its paint faded, the ribbons bleached by sun and rain. Every few months, someone replaced the flowers beneath it. No one ever said who. On the anniversary of her disappearance, a small group of locals gathered again at dusk. There were no television cameras this time, just a circle of neighbors, holding candles and singing softly. One woman who attended the vigil told Kinsport Times News, "It's not just about finding her anymore. It's about remembering her. She's part of this place now. She always will be." Her words captured what law enforcement reports could not, that Summer Wells had transcended the boundaries of the case. She had become something larger, a symbol of innocence lost, of unanswered prayers, and of the fragile persistence of hope. The online tributes continued to grow. Photos of children holding candles, drawings made by students, even pets wearing yellow ribbons began to appear under the hashtag. People from outside Tennessee, Canada, Australia, Brazil left messages of solidarity. They'd never met her, but they felt connected to the story. One viral post read, "4 birthdays have passed, but the world still whispers her name." Even as the investigation froze in place, these small acts of remembrance kept it alive. And in that persistence lay a quiet kind of resistance, a refusal to let the case fade completely into darkness. A retired volunteer who had helped in the 2021 search summed it up best. "The police have stopped walking the hills, but the people haven't stopped carrying her in their hearts. That's what keeps her alive." When the world stopped searching, ordinary people kept the light on. And so, in the late autumn of 2025, as Tennessee's trees turned red and gold, Beech Creek once again grew still. The hills looked the same as they had 4 years before, but something invisible had changed. The case was cold now, colder than the mountain air, but the memory of a barefoot little girl, smiling in a pink shirt, continued to flicker in the minds of thousands. 4 birthdays had come and gone, no arrests, no evidence, no closure. Yet somehow, against every odd, her name still glowed softly in the dark, not as a mystery anymore, but as a reminder that truth, no matter how buried, deserves to be remembered. 4 years and 5 months since that June evening, the hills of Beech Creek stand unchanged, quiet, green, and endless. Yet for everyone who followed the story of Summer Wells, the silence no longer feels like peace. It feels like a question that will not die. By the end of 2025, even as the official investigation remains open, it has become clear that this case will be remembered not only for its mystery, but for what it taught us about time, about systems, and about how fragile the line between safety and tragedy can be. The first lesson is one that investigators have repeated again and again. The first hours matter. Every minute after a child vanishes is a race against disappearance itself. Experts now use the Wells case as a painful reminder of how crucial the early response window truly is. When timelines blur, when calls are delayed, when statements conflict, those first golden hours slip away forever. If anything good can come from Summer's story, it is the lesson that in every missing child report, urgency must override hesitation. Authorities must act fast, coordinate faster, and treat every call as the one that might still end in rescue. The second lesson lies deeper, in the system meant to protect children before tragedy happens. The Department of Children's Services was already familiar with the Wells family before June 2021. Their files, as reported by local outlets like Kingsport Times, news revealed years of instability, poverty, and alleged neglect. After Summer's disappearance, her brothers were removed from the home, but by then, it was too late for her. It raised a haunting question that Tennessee lawmakers still debate today. Could stronger oversight, earlier intervention, or more resources have changed the outcome. In the wake of Summer's case, child advocacy groups across Tennessee renewed their push for reform. They called for more training for social workers, better mental health resources for families at risk, and stricter follow-up on households flagged by DCS. We can't keep waiting until a child is missing to start caring, one advocate told WJHL during an October 2025 interview. Her words cut through the air like truth wrapped in exhaustion. The third lesson is one that reaches beyond agencies. It speaks directly to parents, especially those in isolated or rural areas. Safety cannot be assumed just because the world feels familiar. Summer disappeared not from a busy street or a crowded store, but from her own yard, in daylight, within sight of her home. For many who live in quiet communities, her story shattered the illusion that small towns and back roads are automatically safe. In 2025, police departments and schools across Tennessee launched new awareness campaigns, urging parents to teach children how to respond to danger, how to call for help, and how to never walk off alone, no matter how safe home feels. These lessons about urgency, protection, and awareness have become the fragile legacy of a little girl who never got to turn 10. They are lessons written not in textbooks but in grief. And though they cannot bring her back, they might save the next child whose name we do not yet know. As the year closes, the TBI continues to remind the public that the case remains open, that tips still matter, that silence is the enemy of truth. Their hotline, 1-800-TBI-FIND, and the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office number 423-272-7121, are repeated at the end of every update, every post, every mention of her name. Agents still say the same words they said in 2021, no lead is too small, no information is too late. The age progression image released on August 13, 2025, now circulates as both a tool and a symbol. It shows Summer as she might be at 9 years old, older, wiser, her eyes still bright with something pure. It is a face that lives not in evidence files, but in hearts and memories. When the photo was first released, a journalist described it perfectly: a face reborn through technology and through love. Today, that image sits framed on the desk of a TBI investigator in Nashville. Another copy hangs on the wall of the Beech Creek Volunteer Fire Department, where the first search was launched 4 years earlier. And on countless phones, refrigerators, and car dashboards across Tennessee, her face remains, not as a ghost, but as a promise. In one of the last vigils of 2025, held quietly outside a small church near Rogersville, the pastor's voice trembled as he spoke. "We may never know what happened to her," he said, "but we know what she represents. She reminds us that justice is not always a verdict. Sometimes, it's the act of never giving up." As the candlelight flickered against the night air, a volunteer whispered the words that have become the heartbeat of this story. She would now be 9. The crowd stood in silence for a long moment, parents, neighbors, strangers, all connected by one small name. Somewhere far away, the wind moved softly through the hills, as if carrying that name with it. When the documentary footage fades, it does so slowly, first the cross at Ben Hill Road, then the flicker of candles, then the progressed photo of Summer Wells. A line appears on screen: "If you know anything about the disappearance of Summer Wells, please contact 1-800-TBI-FIND or the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office at 423-272-7121. Then, in quiet white letters, the final message appears against a black screen: "Don't let the next child become another name on a poster." The music fades, leaving only the whisper of her name.